Hello there, welcome to Bros.Gaming. My name's Brandon. I'm very happy to say that Ethan and I have finally joined our first Dungeons & Dragons campaign. It's taken us about 3 months of playing Dungeons & Dragons, but we finally found ourselves a group. Following some advice that I've been given, Ethan and I joined a Melbourne Dungeons & Dragons group on Facebook, and we put out the call that we wanted to join a group. We specified in the post that whilst we enjoy the combat and all that kind of stuff for Dungeons & Dragons, we are interested in the roleplay aspect of it, and that we were open to playing in person or online. After a few days of not getting any responses, admittedly, I started to lose hope and felt like that we had to go back to the drawing board once again, but we had a dungeon master named Bo reach out to us. Now, the world of Dungeons & Dragons isn't new to Bo, but he is a relatively new dungeon master, but he has a big passion for minis and building terrains, and has been brewing a campaign for quite some time and has been looking for players. And he also wants to incorporate lights and music and sound, and Ethan and I just had to jump onto this. The purpose of these vlogs is to cover what it's like for someone getting into Dungeons & Dragons for the first time. And it's at this point where I should say that this level of game production with minis and terrains and lights and sound isn't very common for someone getting into Dungeons & Dragons and shouldn't be considered the standard. I found that different dungeon masters like to utilize minis and scenery in many different ways. I've seen dungeon masters use your D&D minis, your maps. I've seen them use Lego. I've seen them use classic pencil or paper and theatre of the mind. Really, there is no right way of going about DMing in regards to game production. And the only thing that really matters is that you and your players are having fun. And having fun in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign hangs on one very important thing: Session 0. We haven't even started our first Dungeons & Dragons campaign, but I know how important Session 0 is. I've heard way too many horror stories about Dungeons & Dragons that wouldn't have occurred if they were discussed in Session 0. So what is a Session 0 exactly? Those who've already played D&D should already know what a Session 0 is, but essentially Session 0 is about getting your players together before you start a campaign and discussing expectations, rules, characters, and the world that the players are about to dive into. And because eventually one day I plan on running my own Dungeons & Dragons campaign, I've deep dived into what a good Session 0 looks like and the importance of discussing safety tools. Dungeons & Dragons at the end of the day is a game. And because it's a game, people should feel happy and safe in their experience. And this includes having strong communication, emotional intelligence, and inclusiveness. Without deep diving into it, as there are plenty of great resources out there that do discuss safety tools, some things to discuss are triggers, use of language and pronouns, and means of discussing and resolving issues. Session 0 should also include expectations for your campaign. This is especially important for players, as everybody wants to play Dungeons & Dragons for different reasons. Some people want casual fun, some people want to roleplay, some people want drama, and some people just straight up want to fight fantasy creatures. The example of this is Ethan and I are deeply interested in the roleplay element of Dungeons & Dragons. Whilst we both enjoy combat, we wouldn't necessarily want to do a campaign that's just a dungeon crawl of fight after fight after fight without any room for roleplay and collective storytelling. Not to say that there is anything wrong with the alternative if that's what people are into, but it is important that all the players and the DM are on the same page when it comes to what they're after. Otherwise, the experience just isn't fun for everyone. This example also applies for characters. Whilst you want diversity in your party, you don't want to have a party full of wacky characters and one person who thinks that they're Batman, or the opposite of that. Again, cohesiveness with your characters ensures that you're going to have fun at the table. You also want your characters to match the theme or the vibe of the campaign that your dungeon master is running. If your DM wants to run a campaign that's full of political intrigue or a whimsical adventure in the Feywild, you don't want to have a murder hobo in your party. This is why in a Session 0, discussing the vibe and the themes of your campaign is really important. This also benefits the players because they can tailor their backstories to the campaign setting. Nothing is better than a player feeling like that their backstories matter to the campaign. It makes their characters feel connected to the story. As an example, I know for me personally, I need to know what kind of campaign Bo is running so I can make sure that my character is tailored to the campaign. One of my player characters that I've developed and that I'm really keen on playing has a deep backstory and that I need to discuss with Bo to see if it'll work for what he envisions his story to be like. These are just bullet points of what really should be included in the Session 0, and there's a lot more to discuss than what I've already mentioned, which is why I've included some links in the description of this video to some useful Session 0 resources. Anyway, Ethan and I were keen on joining this campaign even though we'd have to travel a fair bit to attend it, so we both signed up and we were ready to attend our first Session 0 of Dungeons & Dragons. Bo was able to gather a party of 6 players and we attended our Session 0 over Discord. In our Session 0, we pretty much discussed most of the mentioned things that should be discussed in a Session 0, such as safety tools, player expectations, home game mechanics, and the setting of the world. The setting of our campaign is set in Faerun with a looming civil war with a dominating king and a young girl with a dragon by her side seeking to take power and lordship over Faerun. This is a setting that drew Ethan and I in pretty quickly, but our next challenge was developing our characters to fit into the world of the campaign. Characters was one of the only things not discussed in Session 0, which I assume is just to leave it as a surprise for when our characters do eventually meet, as they're all strangers. So admittedly, this left me in a little bit of a lurch as I wasn't sure what character I wanted to commit to playing as for a full Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Aside from Ethan's druid, I didn't really know what the other party members' characters were going to be like. I had a choice between 2 ranger characters, being good old Caliber, and my other character who I've worked on for a while, Artem. Artem is a bit of a grimdark character with an extensive backstory, whereas Caliber is a bit more light-hearted and could easily fit into any different style of campaign. I am honestly more interested in playing as Artem as I've developed a fun game build for him, and especially because he has an intricate backstory that I put a lot of time into, including narrative daggers and moments that could create good roleplay, as opposed to Caliber, who I don't really have much of a backstory for apart from just a brief concept. However, my concern is I want to make sure that Artem's type of character will blend in with the rest of the party, because at the end of the day, I want everyone to have fun, and for me, it would help if Artem fits in with the rest of the group. So we've had a month leading up to the Dungeons & Dragons campaign, and I've been discussing with Bo the extensive details of Artem's backstory, including elements that Artem isn't aware of, and I wanted to make sure that this would blend in with the world that Bo's created. This is where I hit another snag in character development, as there were some elements in the backstory I was very attached to that would need to change in order to fit the campaign. Admittedly, I was pretty reluctant to make any changes as I'd spent a long time crafting this character, and making certain changes that were requested would have character repercussions that would alter the arc and the lore that I envisioned for this character. However, this is when I learned a really important lesson when it comes to Dungeons & Dragons. I realized 2 things. A, I was robbing myself of a lot of surprises that I've experienced for Artem, and B, I was railroading Artem's story in a way that wouldn't be fair on Bo's narrative for the story that he wants to make. Railroading is one of the last things I wanted to do, as the main thing I'm excited for in this campaign is collaborative storytelling and roleplay. So I've learned that when developing a character for a campaign, whilst it's good to have a backstory, as ultimately it will inform how you roleplay and play the game, it's important to leave room for collaboration with you and your dungeon master and allow yourself space for your character to just enjoy the narrative ride. As all the most interesting things in a character's life should be within the campaign and not their past. So I've abandoned a few elements of Artem's backstory, which I'm now going to repurpose for my own campaign, and I've now only decided to keep things that are a bit more open-ended and allow room for Bo to work his magic. So the last step for me in developing Artem's character is creating his look. If you've been watching the last 2 vlogs, you will notice that the minis I use in the animatics are from Hero Forge. I genuinely really love the flexibility of character customization on the website, and I've legitimately spent hours just making characters that will show up in the campaign I'm writing. I've also used this to envision characters from Artem's past, which has really been useful for developing Artem's character. However, the important thing for me right now is locking in Artem's appearance and pose for the mini so I can send it off to Bo. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that Bo is printing and painting everybody's minis and is making the terrains all by himself. Like, I have to take a second just to shout out Bo and the hard work he's putting into his campaign, and I really can't wait to share it with you all. Without going into too much backstory for Artem yet, I wanted to give him a rough, dirty look inspired by Strider from Lord of the Rings, Obi-Wan from the Kenobi show, or Bard from The Hobbit. After settling on a design and a pose that I think reflects his character, I purchased a STL file and I sent it off to Bo for him to print and paint. The next step for us was to get our kit together for what we were going to bring to our first D&D session. Instead of physical sheets, Ethan and I built our characters on D&D Beyond, and we were given the freedom to use whatever resources we wanted to use to build our characters, and we were using a point buy system for their stats. Whilst Ethan's character is using subclasses and abilities from the player's handbook, I purchased Tasha's Culture to Everything and Xanathar's Guide to Everything to get access to subclasses and feats that I wanted to use. Once our builds were done, I set out to get us some dice. Whilst I already have a few sets of dice, as I am becoming a dice goblin, Ethan didn't have a set of his own, so I went to a game shop called Gameology to get us some dice. I purchased 2 packs from Asarak's Treasure Blind Bags, I'm probably saying that wrong, so that the dice would be a bit of a surprise. The packs include random dice, a D&D dice bag, and a special coin themed after one of the classes. This is how Ethan went.
Let's go through this, shall we? What do we got here? Thanks to Brandon, the loot goblin. It's a nice blue velvet, red. We'll do the coin first before I even look at the dice. It is a superiority die coin. It's light, but it's very firm. There we go. Don't know if you can see that properly, but lovely. And now the die. That's cool. Weirdly fitting. So we've got kind of like a bluey, sparkly pattern thing. Translucent. Kind of got some like aquamarines and greens in there. Purple lettering for the most part. For all of the parts, I guess. Quite nice. I guess you all want to see there. This one. Bing bong. Focus. How well did it go? Interference. 10.
In my bag, I've got clear dice, which turned out to be cursed and refused to roll above a 1, like ever, and a Sphere of Annihilation coin. But my Dice Goblin adventure didn't end there. The day before our very first Dungeons & Dragons campaign, we had an Oz Comic Con here in Melbourne, and I decided to randomly go. I have always wanted to go to a nerdy convention. Being a huge nerd, I've always wanted to experience the stalls, the costumes, and the guests, but I've never had the courage to go to one. And even though I went on my own, I had an amazing time and I felt so much in my element. I loved seeing all the stalls with the artists, people in amazing costumes, collectibles, and because I'm into D&D, dice. I felt so targeted being there as there was so much stuff I wanted to get. I ended up leaving with a bottle of mead, which is my favorite drink and normally really hard to find. Some dice that I got as a gift for Bo, just to say thank you to all the work that he was doing for the campaign, and an artisan dice. My only regret about the Comic-Con is not going in costume. I come from a family that loves costumes and dressing up, and so I know if I attend another one, I'll have to dress up for it. If you have any ideas of what I should dress up as, let me know. Anyway, the day of our very first Dungeons & Dragons campaign had finally arrived. Everything we've been working towards in these vlogs is finally here. We packed some snacks for the group and travelled to Geelong to attend our very first campaign of Dungeons & Dragons. I can't even begin to describe how excited I was to experience this with Ethan. And then the moment arrived. Bo lowered the lights and started playing music from Baldur's Gate 3 to set the mood. I legitimately had chills. This is when we got to meet our characters and our minis for the first time. I have to tell you, it was surreal and emotional seeing our minis for the first time that Ethan and I had spent months developing in the palms of our hands, ready to venture into our first campaign. And our campaign shall begin in the next video.